conviction investment ideas within China's economy, and also the different ways which you can get exposure to them. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. But before we dive into the individual segments, let's talk a little bit more about China's economy as a whole. So China has come a long way since the 1980s, growing by leaps and bounds to become a global economic powerhouse. And today, China is actually the second largest economy in the world, making up approximately 17% of the global GDP. And with continuing economic reforms and a shift towards a more sustainable growth model, China is fast catching up to the US, and it is just a matter of time before it topples the US to become the #1 economy in the world. So as a matter of fact, China's economy actually expanded by 2.3% in 2020, making it the only major economy to report positive economic growth in what was an extremely challenging year for the global economy. Mirroring the remarkable economic growth is its stock market, which has reached a total market cap of approximately $12 trillion as of mid-2020, making China home to the second most valuable stock market in the entire world. With such a sizable economy and stock market, China is simply too big to ignore for investors who wish to construct a globally diversified portfolio. So within China's economy, there are of course several interesting sectors which we think investors should pay attention to, and one of them is actually its semiconductor industry. So since the very beginning, China has not had a significant presence in the global semiconductor market, and in 2019, the country as a whole accounted for just 5% of the global market, which is far behind US and South Korea, which controlled 47% and 19% of the market respectively. So the main reason why China has such a small market share in the global semiconductor industry is because of technology. In terms of chip design, China has made significant progress over the years, with leading fabless companies like HiSilicon able to design advanced chips used in applications such as 5G and AI. For instance, HiSilicon's new line of smartphone processors is considered to be on par with those that are designed by Apple. But where China is lacking the most right now is foundry technology. For decades, China has long struggled to produce its own chips, especially those that require a cutting-edge manufacturing process. And SMIC, which is China's largest and most advanced foundry, only began producing chips using a 14-nanometer process in the fourth quarter of 2019, a feat that rival TSMC managed to achieve 5 years ago. And within a short span of less than a year, this gap has widened even further, with TSMC introducing its 5-nanometer process in the first half of 2020. So besides TSMC, SMIC's technology is also several generations behind other foundries such as Global Foundries as well as Samsung Foundry. And despite being the largest electronics manufacturing hub in the world, domestic production only accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of China's total semiconductor demand. Its limited technological capabilities means that it has no choice but to fulfill the remaining demand by importing from other countries such as the US. And in 2020, China's chip imports actually reached a record high of $380 billion, and that number has actually been increasing every year as global demand for electronics continues to rise. But with the US clamping down on its access to these critical components, Chinese companies now realize that they can no longer safely rely on imports and will eventually have to start looking inwards to meet their semiconductor needs. The huge amount of chips that China imports every year is a tremendous market opportunity for its local semiconductor companies. And looking ahead, we think that these companies stand to gain thanks to greater domestic demand as well as the government's push to localize chip production. Since the US-China trade war began in 2018, the relationship between both countries has deteriorated substantially. And over the past 2 years, the conflict has actually extended to a number of issues beyond trade, such as intellectual property theft and national security. Right now, national security seems to be the #1 priority of the US government, as it has implemented a string of measures over the past 2 years in an attempt to hamstring the growth of China's technology companies, starting with Huawei. So back in May 2019, the US Commerce Department actually announced that it has placed Huawei as well as 68 of its affiliates on the entity list, claiming that the telecoms equipment manufactured by the company can be used for spying, and therefore it poses a national security threat to the US. And this effectively restricts Huawei's ability to purchase vital components like semiconductors from the US to manufacture its products. And from then till now, many other Chinese tech companies have fallen into the crosshairs of US regulators. And if these companies are unable to find an alternative supply for chips, their operations could be severely affected. So in response to the sanctions, Chinese officials, they began accelerating plans to strengthen the country's semiconductor industry. As part of its Made in China 2025 plan, China aims to produce 70% of all the semiconductors it requires by 2025, with a longer-term goal of becoming completely self-sufficient. So given how crucial semiconductors are to a nation's development, we think that the sanctions will actually have the opposite effect of compelling China to double down its efforts in building up its chip-making industry instead of slowing the rise of China's tech sector. The recent events have revealed China's vulnerability in this key sector, which we think China will be very keen to fix these issues. The road to self-sufficiency will definitely be paved with difficulties, but we believe that China will persevere through as the future of the nation depends on the success of this endeavor. So to achieve its goal of becoming self-sufficient in chip production, the government has actually laid out several policies to support the industry. One of its greatest efforts was to establish a national fund to help promote the growth of the local semiconductor industry. So this fund, which was first set up in 2014, has invested close to 350 billion yuan in various projects and companies within China's semiconductor industry to date. It is estimated that roughly 67% of the monies went to manufacturing firms, which includes both your integrated device manufacturers as well as your foundries, demonstrating the government's priority in building up the nation's chip-making capabilities. So secondly, the government has also made significant adjustments to its tax policies last year, which is a decision that should greatly benefit local semiconductor companies. So under the new policy, chip makers that have been in operation for more than 15 years and produce chips using a 28 nanometer and below process may be exempted from paying corporate income taxes for up to 10 years. And if you look at the table, you can see that these tax benefits also extend to other companies, such as those using mature processes, as well as your fabless companies, materials and equipment firms, so on and so forth. So the idea here is very simple, and it is that by reducing the tax burden, these companies will actually have more resources to allocate to capital expenditure, which will hopefully improve their technological capabilities quicker and allow them to compete with their global peers. And again, through the way these policies are structured, we can tell that the government's focus here is clearly on strengthening the nation's chip-making capabilities, which is again an area that it is currently lacking the most. So with the motivation, as well as the resources to narrow the gap between themselves and the US, we believe that China's semiconductor industry is about to enter a phase of supercharged growth, one that will bring about many investment opportunities in time to come. So looking ahead, we think that China's semiconductor companies will experience a period of high earnings growth, which is a key ingredient that will drive share prices higher. And based on our own estimates, we think that China's semiconductor industry as a whole, it offers an upside of close to 50%. So with that said, investors who are looking for ideas for their tactical portfolio may want to consider the Global X China Semiconductor ETF, which is our recommended ETF for China's semiconductor industry. So this ETF, it seeks to replicate the exposure of the FactSet China Semiconductor Index, which consists of a basket of 24 Chinese semiconductor companies. And top 10 holdings of this ETF will include names like WIL Semiconductor, as well as SMIC, which is, again, the largest foundry in mainland China. So besides having a low expense ratio of just 0.68%, another advantage of this ETF is that it provides investors with exposure to semiconductor firms which are listed on mainland China, which shares may not be as easily accessible to certain investors. And to top it all off, using an ETF such as this one will also help to minimize any company-specific risks. So to sum things up, we think that there are many reasons to be positive about China's semiconductor industry: strong state support, rising domestic demand, the government's plan to localize chip production, and the potential removal of US sanctions could drive an upward re-rating in share prices. And with that, I've come to the end of my segment. Thank you so much.